Ja, herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe unserer Reihe mit Ranga Yogeshwar, die ja mindestens einmal im Quartal stattfindet. Und es ist sogar in Corona-Zeiten gelungen, diese Reihe in ihrem Rhythmus annähernd beizubehalten. Im Sommer, als wir hier noch nicht wieder unser physisches Veranstaltungsprogramm hatten, wir sind ja erst seit wenigen Tagen wieder mit Veranstaltungen quasi hier vor Ort. Da gab es eine rein digitale Spezialausgabe mit Ranga und der Virologin Melanie Brinkmann und dem Virologen Adam Grundhoff. Und dann ging es über ganz verschiedene Aspekte von Corona. Und das Interesse an dieser Folge war riesengroß, deutlich über 100.000 Zugriffe über die verschiedenen Kanäle. Also es geht eben auch, das Futurium, obwohl wir jetzt kein Medienkonzern sind oder so etwas, doch digital auch nach draußen zu tragen. Aber da brauchen wir natürlich bekannte, prägnante Köpfe wie eben Ranga als wohl bekanntester Wissenschaftsjournalist hier in Deutschland, der eben uns als Haus, uns als Futurium auch eng verbunden ist. Wie dieses Beispiel zeigt, hat Corona hier am Futurium uns auch nochmal besonders motiviert, unser Programm stärker und schneller zu digitalisieren, als wir das vorgehabt hatten. Wir hatten da eher so einen mehrjährigen Horizont im Blick, haben viel auch physisch hier vor Ort gemacht, aber inzwischen machen wir faktisch alles mindestens im Doppel digital, manchmal auch rein digitale Veranstaltungen. Und deshalb begrüße ich auch alle, die uns heute per Livestream verfolgen über YouTube. Herzlich willkommen auch an Sie. Ranga Yogeshwar hat heute mit Stefania Milan von der Universität in Amsterdam eine Expertin eingeladen für das komplexe Zusammenspiel von Technologie und Gesellschaft. Er wird sie nachher sicherlich auch noch ausführlicher vorstellen. Mit ihren Forschungsschwerpunkten Cloud-Protest, Codepolitik und Datenaktivismus ist Stefania Milan buchstäblich, das kann man sagen, am Puls der Zeit. Sie rückt Bereiche in den Blickpunkt, die gerade auch in der Corona-Krise weiter an Bedeutung gewonnen haben. Und ihr besonderes Interesse gilt dabei den Möglichkeiten der Selbstorganisation, der Emanzipation und der Autonomie, die die digitale Technologie bieten kann. Das klingt doch erstmal verheißungsvoll, aber wie immer sind mit solchen Themen, gerade eben auch mit den digitalen Themen, auch immer Risiken verbunden, was die Technik an Potenzial für mehr zivilgesellschaftliches Empowerment freilegt. Das kann auf der anderen Seite auch wieder zu Problemen führen, zu Überwachung, Kontrolle, Hate Speech, was auch immer. Wir werden das vielleicht ja heute alles noch erfahren. Es ist in jedem Fall das Janusköpfige an diesem Animal namens Digitalisierung. Und ich bin jedenfalls sehr gespannt, welche Perspektiven hier Ranga und Stefania Milan uns aufzeigen werden. Letztlich, denke ich, geht es um nichts weniger oder um nicht weniger als um die Zukunft von bürgerschaftlichem Engagement. Also es ist richtig das Thema, das uns eigentlich gerade auch in den nächsten Jahren beschäftigen wird, das uns heutzutage schon beschäftigt. Und es geht auch darum, wie sich unsere bereits in erheblichem Umfang datengetriebene liberale Demokratie, ich glaube, da brauchen wir uns nichts vorzumachen, die ist ja auch schon in weiten Teilen eben datengetrieben, wie sich diese datengetriebene liberale Demokratie weiterentwickeln kann. Also ich denke, wir können uns alle sehr freuen auf dieses Gespräch und Ranga, the stage is yours. Dankeschön.
Hallo, herzlich willkommen. Ich freue mich total in mehrfacher Hinsicht. Das erste ist, online ist super. Aber wenn man monatelang alles online macht, ist es irgendwann auch ein bisschen blöd. Also von Zeit zu Zeit möchte man richtige Menschen sehen. Ich freue mich sehr, heute Abend hier vor Ort zu sein. Und das Thema Risiken und Versprechen von Big Data. Versprechen gibt es ja viele. Die Welt soll besser werden, intelligenter und so weiter. Im Rheinland gibt es immer den Spruch, Versprechen und Halten, beides geht nicht. Also die Frage ist, wird die Digitalisierung ihre Versprechen einhalten und Auf der anderen Seite, Stefan Brandt hat es angedeutet, es geht um diese Janusköpfigkeit. Darüber wollen wir sprechen. Es gibt gute Gründe dafür und es gibt eben auch die ein oder anderen Punkte, wo wir, glaube ich, doppelt drüber nachdenken müssen. Ich bin total froh aus mehreren Gründen. Ich bin froh, weil zum einen wir jetzt das machen, was man neuerdings eine Hybridveranstaltung nennt. Also jetzt gucke ich mal in diese Kamera, weil man hat immer das Gefühl, man sei nur hier unter sich, aber da draußen ist die YouTube-Community oder ich sag mal, ich würde nicht mal sagen Community und YouTube, aber Menschen, die diese Veranstaltung von außen verfolgen. Ich sage mal Hallo und wir wollen das nicht nur in Form einer Einbahnstraße machen, sondern es gibt auch die Möglichkeit, Fragen zu stellen. Bei YouTube gibt es die Grammatik des Chats, also da schreibt man irgendwas rein. Und wir werden dann diese Fragen hier auch im Nachhinein oder einen Teil der Fragen zumindest mit aufgreifen können. Und Sie hier im Raum haben auch die Möglichkeit, Fragen zu stellen. Nun stellen Sie sich genau vor, wie das geht. Sie werden einige Mikrofone sehen. Und wir sind hier sowas von genau. Das heißt, wenn Sie eine Frage stellen wollen, dann müssen Sie Ihre Maske zuerst wieder anziehen und dann gehen Sie zum Mikrofon. Sie müssen die Maske anlassen, Sie dürfen das Mikrofon nicht anfassen. Sie werden auf dem Boden einen pinkfarbenen Kreis finden. So ist Kommunikation in Zeiten von Corona. Und dann können Sie natürlich Ihre Frage oder Ihre Anmerkung formulieren, aber bitte behalten Sie die Maske an, fassen Sie das Mikrofon auch nicht an. Das ist total wichtig, weil sonst muss man das ständig nachdesinfizieren. Und ich war letzte Woche in Hamburg im großen Rathaus, der Bürgermeister sprach und danach kam einer und der hatte so eine Sprayflasche und das macht immer so tschuku, tschuku, tschuku. Also es sind neue Geräusche auch in Zeiten von Corona. Gut, also das ist das Prozedere und ich freue mich jetzt auf, und das ist wiederum ein Geschenk des Tages, dass Stefania hier ist. Warum? Sie wissen, in Zeiten von Corona ist alles flüssig und es gibt einige Gebiete auch um Amsterdam herum, die urplötzlich zur roten Zone erklärt wurden und gestern haben wir alle geschwitzt und gesagt, oh Gott, ja? Also entweder ein Schnelltest oder Quarantäne, aber zum Glück war Stefania gar nicht in der roten Zone und dank Hannah Winker, die das immer wunderbar organisiert, haben wir irgendeinen Way gefunden, wo Stefania es bis hierhin geschafft hat und sie hatte in ihrer Mail geschrieben, ich bin so dankbar, endlich mal eine echte Veranstaltung und kein Stream. Begrüßt mit mir Stefania Milan. Ich werde jetzt die Sprache wechseln auf Englisch. Noch und ein herzliches Dankeschön haben wir Dolmetscher, und zwar menschliche Dolmetscher, die das machen. Es ist durchaus denkbar, dass wir in ein paar Jahren einfach da sitzen und unsere Earbuds haben. Und es wird sowieso in jeder Sprache übersetzt, die wir wollen. Aber wie gesagt, das ist ein Versprechen. Wir gucken mal, was es für sich hält. Und I will switch to English and first of all, well, a warm welcome once again, Stefania. Very glad that you made it here. Stefania, your roots are in Italy, and I think so you, first of all, during the COVID phase, you were in Italy.
No, well, yes.
When we phoned, you were in Italy.
You're
That's
right.
at least what I recall.
Yes, I was skiing.
Skiing in Italy.
Yeah, when it all started. When we last spoke, I was in Italy just on holiday over the summer.
Okay. And so your title, your official title, which we put up there, is Associate Professor of New Media and Digital Culture at the University of Amsterdam.
Correct.
Well, what is your topic? What are your foci? What are you concentrating on?
Well, what I really like to do is to look at how citizens, people like us, but also people who are a little more expert, use and appropriate data and technology for emancipation. So to enjoy their citizenship rights, to further human rights, to fight for freedom pretty much all over the world. This is really what I care about. Now, of course, alongside the positive story, there is also a number of risks that we look at, like infringement of privacy and surveillance, and that we worry about.
And also the representation of societies and data. This sort of relationship is also included.
Yeah, the interplay. How is society changed by data, and also the opposite direction, of course. Our data changed by society.
The interesting thing is, I just would like to show you one map which most of the people here, and also I believe the people following us know, which is the COVID-19 dashboard, which is assembled from all the data at Johns Hopkins University. This is the actual data situation we have today. So first of all, we are speaking about roughly over 30 million global cases of COVID-19, approaching 1 million people who have died. And well, this looks at a lot of data. And if you look at the global map, you will see all these red dots. Some dots are bigger, some dots are smaller. And at first sight, many of us believe, okay, if we look at this map, you can see, okay, the US is really red, India is red, Europe is red. But there are other countries, like African countries, for example, where one would think, okay, this is not a big topic. And the challenging question is, already here, I think so, this is not a fair representation in a certain way. So looking at such a map, we would have to interpret the data, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. This is the data that we have. And it reflects, therefore, the lab testing capacities of these different countries, access to healthcare, because not everywhere testing for COVID is free nor simply available. So it might well be that certain countries in Africa, for example, simply don't have the capacity to count the cases. It doesn't mean that their people are, unfortunately, not dying.
So it's a bit similar to, well, the media coverage in the classical media, where we see all the details, perhaps from one country, and we miss out even big catastrophes in other countries, which just sort of result in a one-liner and more not. So we were never very fair in representing, well, a world in an equal way. Is there a chance for this to happen in the digital way, in the digital age?
Well, things are changing pretty quickly. I don't remember now the exact figures, but at the inception of the pandemic, so we're talking about January, February, only 2 countries in Africa, according to the official United Nations figures, testing capacity. So only 2 of the many, many countries that you see there could actually identify whether some of their citizens were sick or not. If I remember correctly, and I guess don't quote me on that, because my memory for number is a bit fuzzy typically, but about 50, 60 countries now have that ability to test. So, but it is absolutely true that, well, first of all, as human beings, and this is one of the basic principles of journalism, we do care very much about what is close to us, what is familiar, what we can understand. So this is a very human factor that journalists and media know very well. At the same time, it's also true that there are some bottlenecks. News from certain parts of the world simply do not reach us. Now, the problem is that, I mean, I might care more about my own country of origin than I care about some faraway country. No. Again, this is a very human factor. But we are really facing here a sort of new dimension of poverty, which we may call data poverty. It's a luxury today not to exist in data like this, because it means you can care for yourself, you can cater for yourself, you can solve the problem by yourself, which is unfortunately not the case with...
Well, all the parents know it. If you run somewhere where you don't have internet, the kids go crazy. No data, you're lost. So we're getting more and more dependent. We'll speak about that. Yep. But in this session, we want to do it in a very interactive way. And ich gehe jetzt nochmal auf Deutsch, because Stefania knows exactly what I'm going to say. Wir haben ein sogenanntes Mentimeter. Das heißt, normalerweise bei Veranstaltungen heißt es immer, bitte Handys aus und so weiter. Hier heißt es Handys an, vielleicht auf lautlos stellen, was den Klingelton betrifft. Und wir haben ein Mentimeter und vielleicht ganz kurz vom Prozedere, weil ihr im Internet, ich duze immer das Internet, ich weiß auch nicht warum, ne? Man sieht das Publikum und man duzt sich unter YouTubern, also die Community eben da draußen im Netz, die kann auch aktiv mitmachen. Die ist offenbar schon im Netz, aber wenn Sie hier im Raum auch sagen, ich brauche WLAN, es gibt einen Wi-Fi-Hotspot, nämlich Futurium Hotspot, so heißt der. Und dann gehen Sie auf die Seite, und das müssen Sie jetzt einmal machen, weil wir werden einige Fragen haben, www.menti.com. Und wenn Sie auf der Seite sind, gibt es einen Code, der heißt 6095200. 6095200. Ich sehe, meine Kinder sind genauso wie sonst auch. Die gucken auch immer aufs Handy. Gut, ist das für jeden soweit klar? Gibt es Probleme? Ich sehe keine Stimme. Und jetzt würde ich Ronny bitten, mir einfach mal die erste Testfrage, damit wir einfach das System testen, reinzusetzen. Und zwar, wir haben gerade die Karte gesehen und ich möchte einfach mal von Ihnen wissen, stellen Sie sich vor, es gibt jetzt irgendwann einen Corona-Impfstoff, okay? Und ich möchte von Ihnen wissen, würden Sie sich dann auch impfen lassen? Und Sie können voten und wie gesagt, auch die Community da draußen kann aktiv mitmachen. Also die zwei, die uns im Livestream verfolgen, die sollten das dann auch einfach tun. Dann fühlen wir uns alle großartig und sagen, super. Im Nachhinein haben die Pech, dann wird das Video 100.000 Mal geliked, aber die können nicht aktiv mitmachen. Und Sie sehen, man sieht das jetzt wachsen, schon da fängt das große Problem an. Sie würden manchmal anders votieren, wenn Sie die Daten nicht sehen. Aber was man hier sieht, ist, und das ist sehr erfreulich, naja, ich weiß nicht, es ist eigentlich ziemlich repräsentativ, wenn Sie genau hingucken, also roundabout 60% sagen ja, 18% nein, 21% vielleicht. Bei n gleich 33 wird statistisch eigentlich ziemlich schwach ist, muss ich dazu sagen. Also der Fehlerbalken in einem Futurium, einem Wissenschaftsmuseum, muss man das dazu sagen. Aber wir sehen einen Trend und der Trend heißt, ja, grob 60%. Wir switchen wieder um zu den Folien, denn wenn man sich mal die Untersuchungen anschaut, vor 2 Wochen hat das MIT eine weltweite Umfrage gemacht und hat genau diese Frage gestellt. Also, wenn es einen Impfstoff gibt, would you choose to get vaccinated? And if you look at the numbers, we just have in the back of our mind, we were about 60%, which is more or less what also the average in Germany is. In Singapore, or in Southeast Asian countries, it's much higher. In the US, it's even lower, and I dare say, well, 50% say no. So first of all, my deeper question is, we are speaking of data, we are speaking of a society where social media play a big role. We are seeing big discussions on vaccination. Is this also a bit sort of salted into this result that it also reflects a bit a state of mind of insecurity which we're seeing?
I guess
Is that
so.
an interpretation?
It is actually a good interpretation, as far as I can tell. I'm not an expert on vaccination, unfortunately. I would like to be. But definitely I'm an expert, if I may say so, on social media. And what we see is that more and more people get their news mostly, primarily, and almost exclusively through social media. So, for example, they might actually have a look at, read the news from their preferred news source, but instead of going to the website of that preferred news source, they do follow, for example, Twitter or Facebook feeds and stuff like that. And, well, this is a manifestation, one of the many, many manifestations of what we may call Dartification of Society. So, the fact that more and more our human activities are mediated and transmuted as well. They result in, they produce, but they're in turn influenced by data. There are data that we produce ourselves, right? For example, what you're doing now with your phone is producing data. Data that is like voting, so it's an opinion data, but it's also data about, perhaps if you have it active, your location, or you name it. Actually, there's an enormous amount of trackers on each and every phone, some of which you can control, some you cannot control. But the phone, social media, this computer, facial recognition cameras, AI, artificial intelligence devices and mechanisms, they are all producing data. They are in turn fed by data. So we really live sort of enveloped in this world of very invisible transformation of information.
So the interesting part is we are also delivering data. If I would go back, if you once again look at this map, in fact, we were speaking about the red points and about the uneven and unequal representation concerning, well, the data of COVID-19 infections worldwide. But most of us are not really aware that even the map itself, which is also geographic data, is biased. Stefania sent me a lovely map, which is just a bit a different view of this world. And in this view, we are now looking at countries represented in a what you call equal area projection. So we see the same area. And for example, if I would have asked the question, how big is Indonesia? I would show you a map of Europe and just once give me a feeling of Indonesia. Now you suddenly realize that just Indonesia, with the myriad of islands, is, well, almost bigger than Europe. It's not even on our line because it's squeezed. All the countries at the equator are squeezed. So this has been a culture of data misrepresentation where, well, the northern world looked a bit bigger than the countries around the equator. So, in fact, we are used to data bias. We are used to, well, a biased view representing different things in the reality, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Now, I played an extra trick, right? Turning it upside down and seeing it from the point of view of perhaps Australia. But every data, including informations, data is ultimately information, right? We have in mind very digital forms of data now, but we are talking about information, and a map is information. In fact, it's a data visualization. It's a depiction of information on, for example, typically a piece of paper or a screen. Represents what we see from our point of view. So we might assume that the world as we know it, which is the Mercator representation, represents faithfully the size of the country, the surface. In fact, this is simply the representation from the Western designer that first put them up on paper.
He was even a German. He was in Duisburg, so I mean Mercator. But, well, it's one of the many possibilities to represent,
reality.
The three-dimensional globe on a two-dimensional representation.
But then, of course, I mean, in school we are taught a very different map, and that's what we keep in the back of our mind, right? But this is a very good analogy to precisely talk about the point of view and the context-specific nature of pretty much any information, any data, whatever its nature, analog or digital.
Well, it goes even further. I just want to show you some analog examples. If you take the longitude, the meridian, der Nullmeridian, goes through Greenwich, which is London. If you look back in history, it went through Paris one time, it went through Madeira, which was the Spanish age. I always ask myself, in the next couple of years, would we see a shift towards Beijing, which would be logical in the sort of history we had. So are we good in retuning these sort of inequalities? I mean, which has nothing to do with the digital age, but which is a deeper cultural question. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I would really like to see a bit more correction, active correction, and not just the correction, but even active awareness or fact-finding about discrimination that comes through information. I'm not, unfortunately, extremely positive about that because, again, it's a matter of point of view. And again, we're back to the fact that we are human beings and we are biased. We care about certain things, we tend to overlook others. There is a bit, if you look at data and data production, it is true that data enable a certain type of grassroots activity. So people who are not the mercator driving the drawing the maps. But from their tiny perspective, as individuals or small group, wherever in the world, they have the ability through the digital to actually chart a different reality. So we do see more and more of that. Unfortunately, we see a lot of monopolies as well. So at the end of the day, it's also a matter not just of who produces the information, and we have a lot more than before, but who is there to listen to this information. And if I'm Amazon or Google, I might be able to impose my new cup-sized version of the world. If I'm just Stefania sitting somewhere in Amsterdam, I might not be able to do exactly that.
But it's interesting. Let's talk a bit about data, and I would like to raise a question, and I will ask Ronnie to raise a question which would be slide 3. So let me give you an introduction. Normally, if you download an app, the app asks, "May I use your contacts?" or "May I use your location?" And the question is here, just imagine you have an app and it says, "May I use your acceleration sensor?" First of all, let me explain. If you have a smartphone, the smartphone is full of different sensors. Some, if you know the activity trackers, there's a small sensor which registers whether it's going up and down, whether you're doing sports, walking stairs. You have a sensor looking at air pressure, so an altimeter. You have different sensors, and here it's just, and the app would just say, "May I just use your, acceleration sensor?" Also darf die App Ihren Bewegungssensor darauf zugreifen, ja oder nein. Und zwar nur darauf. Also das heißt, sie weiß nicht, wo Sie sind, sondern nur, ob das Handy sich bewegt. Also klassische Aktivitätsgeschichten und so weiter. Und ich möchte einfach von Ihnen wissen, ob Sie sagen würden ja. Und I would say, I don't know if it's representative, aber etwa 1/5 sagt ja, und 20%, 19%, danke. Also 20% sagen ja, 80% sagen nein. Vielen Dank für die Beantwortung. Stefania, if you look at the use of data, we want to switch back. Ronny, du kannst wieder zurückschalten. Data normally is something, all of us, the amount of apps we allow to trace data. We saw here about 20% accepted. What's your finding? I mean, is this representative of people using data, or are we giving much more?
We're actually giving much more. Primarily because not every time we are asked whether we want to give up our information, there's the General Data Protection Regulation that checks on these things, but there's much, much more that the phone collects. So not everything is immediately visible. But there's another dimension. Giving up your data is actually convenient. So I might be happy to know that my phone knows that in Berlin because I might actually want to have nice restaurant recommendations. I use Google Maps, which sometimes fails me, but it is like part of the fabric of my daily life. So we have to acknowledge that no matter how much we value our privacy, and it seems people in the room, people in the virtual room of YouTube do actually value privacy, well done. But there is also convenience on the plate that weighs pretty much. So It's a difficult answer. It's very, again, content-specific. But I think we are willing, at the end of the day, in practical terms, to give up more than we're willing to admit.
The big question is there data awareness in the sense of, do people realize what can you do with the data? I mean, is there a growing sensitivity for that? Is there a sensitivity for that? Or is it just, okay, it's, nice and easy to use, so I will just opt in?
I think it's growing slowly. I have to say that was my hypothesis back in 2014, after the Snowden revelations. You might remember that, when a contractor for working for the US government leaked literally, pretty much illegally, in fact it is now on exile, some very crucial information about spying programs. And there are a number of them. It's not just the US, unfortunately, that made the news, but there's also national security agency counterparts in each and every country, in yours, in mine, in my host country, that collect data more or less openly. Often not very openly, because it's a matter of national security. And under the header of national security, a lot goes by. But so back then, I really thought, well, with this evidence, come on, guys, we have to change our way of looking at data. We have to change our way of looking even at our own state. I mean, how can you trust a state who doesn't tell it's spying on you? And again, national security is one thing, but there is much more there. And they were, in the US, for example, they were spying at foreign citizens.
Mm-hmm.
I have to
just
say,
put a picture, because it's not only the US Americans. This was, I think, so from the Chaos Computer Club in Hamburg. So this is the phase where we realize, well, there are many data suckers, legal and illegal ones.
Yeah.
But my question is, are people aware? Because at the end, well, do we really change a habit? Mm-hmm. Do we have a growing sensitivity? I mean, we had the Snowden affair, but do people really realize, well, this could be important for me, or is that something still abstract?
It depends on whom you're talking about.
Okay.
And how much literacy in digital and data literacy that individual, that collectivity has. I do believe that in Germany, you have a slightly more awareness, or in certain parts of Europe, Germany and the Netherlands included, there's more awareness about privacy. Perhaps for your history, not that, back in time, about heavy surveillance at the societal level. So awareness is growing, but very, very, very slowly. And my dream would have to have these things actually taught in schools, if you really want to change the way society thinks.
Let me give you an example of data awareness, and I want to show you something which I discovered 2 years back. This is a guy named Max Little. And he was at MIT, now is at the Ashton University in Birmingham. And I asked you the question about this acceleration sensor and the smartphone, you remember? And 20% of you said, no problem. Now, Max Little did a lot of analytics. He's a mathematician by his background, analyzing with algorithms changes. And what is quite interesting is he discovered that, well, if you take your sensor, your acceleration sensor, and you look at the walking pattern of a person, so just the up and down, you are very sensitive and you can start to tackle small irregularities. And these irregularities are typical for Parkinson's disease. And he matched this. And in fact, he started over with Parkinson. His first endeavor was what is called the Parkinson Voice Initiative. So he analyzed vocal cords and the voice and the changes of the voice with Parkinson patients. And then, well, he continued with, this data. And, he is now able to spot in the first clinical experiments people with a precursor syndrome of Parkinson, which means people where we would never see, oh, this or that guy is, having a beginning of a Parkinson story, but the data already shows it very clearly. I would first, before we discuss over it, with that in mind and with the deeper sense which is being raised, who is owning this data? I mean, this data is being collected naturally by, well, mobile phone services perhaps. I would like to re-ask the question, because it could be that, well, somebody else, you could sell the data, for example, to an insurance company, or could be a new business model. Give me your acceleration data and I can inform an insurance. I would like to re-ask, I want to once again ask Ronnie to re-ask the question I asked, which is now going to be, I think so, slide number 4. Ich will einfach die Frage nochmal wiederholen. Also das ist jetzt so eine Frage der Lernfähigkeit. Zu gucken, nochmal dieselbe Frage, wenn Sie den Bewegungssensor haben und da kann man drauf zugreifen und Sie werden gefragt, darf die App das nutzen, würden Sie dann sagen ja oder nein? And this is now very interesting and I'm totally shocked. We should never show it, but it's interesting. I want to understand this. So my feeling was that everybody is shocked and say, okay, now I understood this is sensitive. This shows a doubling of the people who say, hey, great. Because now, at last, somebody is able to diagnose Parkinson. I just ask, hand waving here in the room. I don't know about the YouTube community, hi, I can't see you, but here in the room, who changed his mind? Wer hat seine Meinung? Oh, would one of you have the kindness, we have a microphone, if you would put on your mask, I would just like to hear the argument, so that would be very fascinating to understand what is going on. Put on your mask, you have a microphone somewhere there in the back. Thank you first of all for... Sie können auf Deutsch.
Okay, ja, also eigentlich geht es mir darum, auf meinen eigenen Körper zu achten, und wenn diese App mir so eine Möglichkeit bereitstellt, dann würde ich schon also dann auch meine Meinung dazu ändern oder bereitwillig sein, dass das auch nachvollzogen werden kann.
Also Sie sagen im Klartext, hey, da gibt es eine neue Option einer vielleicht besseren Diagnostik. Ja. Why not?
Genau.
Die Frage dahinter, ich stelle sie bewusst, macht es einen Unterschied, wer dann die Daten nutzt, oder sagen Sie, das ist völlig egal, Hauptsache... Ja, also es kann ja auch sein, dass Ihr Arbeitgeber sagt, gut, ich verlängere den Vertrag nicht. Ich habe da irgendwo Quellen, die mir sagen...
Ja, Sie haben ja eben auch schon angedeutet, dass das sicherlich auch interessante Informationen für Krankenversicherungen sein könnten. Und von daher gesehen geht man natürlich ein Risiko ein. Von daher, also für meine Begriffe wäre es dann auch wichtig, dass das dann auch nicht in falsche Hände gerät, natürlich, diese Informationen.
Aber es ist auf jeden Fall, so, I hope you got the translation. Vielen Dank. This is the lovely thing I like. There is surprise, huh? Did you think this would come out?
Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. I was very, very curious when we first discussed it, because it is indeed, I mean, we all fearful for our future, right? And if I can be cured earlier, why not, right? Then as someone who is actually a bit of on the conspiracy theory side with data, maybe I would not give up my data. Maybe I would try to find a way to keep the data on my phone and give them up directly to someone who can analyze them, right?
But I would assume, I mean, I show you a building. Does anybody know this building? Einmal winke, winke. Ja. Huh? Die Stasi-Zentrale. So we're sitting in the midst of a country where data sucking was a big problem in those days. And sometimes I ask myself if you would have told the Stasi people who were still working in that building, just wait. You just have to wait a little bit because people will install microphones by themselves in all their houses. So what has changed? Are there people using Alexa, Siri, Google? Just once hand waving. Yes, thank you. Who has Alexa? Siri? If I say, hey Siri, my phone is going to start talking to me, so. So what happens there? Because we have these two worlds. Huh? We have the world of extreme scarcism. You're afraid of data, you don't want to have, you don't want to share, it's privacy is all. And suddenly, within, well, 2-3 decades, a total shift in sensitivity. What is happening?
Well, I guess to start with, we live in a democracy. And therefore, we tend to trust a bit more our environment. We feel far less at risk. I'm just assuming I was too young back then, but I'm just assuming that people were much more scared for very good reasons back then. We feel a bit safer. We don't, at least in Western Europe, we can express our political opinion without, being jailed for that or suffering particularly. That's one important factor. The other is, again, convenience. I mean, Alexa tells you the weather without even having to open the window, without even having to go on the app of the weather app on your phone, right? And we're fascinated by these things. I mean, who doesn't like robots? I mean, since we were children, we are fascinated by, automation. And the more automation looks like, an automated agent looks like us, the more we are, it's just like almost like a doll, no? It's magic. So technology is magic, and this is the manifestation of magic in our life. So this is the beautiful part of that. At the same time, what we do not realize is that data and what they collect is mostly metadata, so sometimes data that is anonymized, although we are also profiled at the same time. It's actually very important, can tell about us much more than we think. Because one thing is the data, one piece of data, the rest is the data when it is aggregated and profiles are made.
I will give you one example. Just, if you look into patent applications, there are some patent applications by Google, by Amazon, and there are patent applications looking at the noise in a kitchen, or in these patent files, for example, children brushing their teeth. So there's an algorithm saying, can you identify how long children are brushing their teeth? Or can you identify if small children go to a cupboard where there's alcohol? Or just to give you two quotes, can you see mischief of the individual? I mean, just imagine you have a couple staying in the same flat, and now you identify that they are quarreling. Well, this is a good business model for advertising. I mean, if you do advertising for holiday, vacation, hotels, well, show 2 different hotels, which is quite logical. Or in another, this is the wording from the patent, where in the patent it says one or more sniffer algorithms can attempt to identify trigger words in the voice content which can indicate a level of interest of the user. So depending on if you say a car or if you say this Mercedes or this Volkswagen, go at that. So this is far more. And these companies are naturally trying a lot. I mean, if you looked at we have geolocation, we have even, the medical business, where this is really highly sensitive data. And again, I want to say this can be practical, but this is all in the hands of very few. Are we unaware of something which is about to happen, a takeover? Or is it naive of us, or perhaps is it just an old category and we should not worry about it? What is your feeling?
Well, if a machine like Alexa can prevent people fighting or gender violence, domestic violence, for example, why not? Right? There might be some good side.
Yeah, but imagine calling and then you have Alexa. She will start,
interjecting.
You have 3 people. Don't talk to her in that way.
But maybe you can have Alexa calling directly the police.
That's even worse.
Well, not if you are the person who is being beaten up. And
yes, but imagine, Stefania is from Italy, yeah? So, an Italian living in Berlin, Italians, huh? Alexa would start continuously calling the police with Italian families because they have a different... So, how do you deal with that?
I don't have Alexa to start with. It would be very, very noisy otherwise, and it is already noisy by default. But no, the problem, so what I wanted to point out is the fact that some of these tools might actually be useful at the end of the day. The real problem, as you rightly pointed out, is that, well, this is behavior prediction, and not just behavior prediction, it's behavior shaping. Mm-hmm. And it's advertising based on that behavior. So it is private companies taking our data and then trying to shape our behavior through giving us certain pieces of information, like your example about the hotels, but all the way to try to influence the way we vote in elections, like Cambridge Analytica in the US is a good case in point. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that we do not know what is the agenda of these large companies, although Google really tries to do its best to make us believe they're very, very good people.
If we speak about data, we have very different views. We'll speak about the elections very soon, but we have views where this is the sort of big brother is watching you. Huh? I was in Shenzhen, Longyang, and they have a smart city center, and this is fantastic. And I'm very honest, this is fantastic. This is the total representation of a city, so you know at first sight the number of kindergartens, the number of hospital beds, internet failure, electricity failure, so this really works. It's a difference to Germany where school starts and in our village people are there and say, we have children, but they use artificial intelligence to identify, for example, buildings which were raised illegally, totally automatic. Naturally, they sort of use pattern recognition and so on within cities, for example, to identify hotspots. And naturally, while face recognition technology is totally accepted in China. And number plates, automatic readout. So nowadays in China, if you drive with a car and you are too fast, you just get a ticket automatically. And I was in Shenzhen, Longyang, with the director of, or one of the leaders of this center, and it was quite nice because we crossed the road, and it was red, and I crossed. And he said, don't do that, because there's the camera and it will identify you and so on. And I said, listen, I'm born in India. My father told me, go when it's red, but also look when it's green. Different cultures. In China, this is something where I don't say they are bad. They go on, and here is one case, Face++, expression analysis. So we are not only speaking of data in the sense of abstract data of earning, but this goes into the interpretation of emotions. I can just read it. By analyzing the students' expressions and movements, help teachers to judge the degree of acceptance. Before we discuss, I want to ask the audience, what do you think? I have a Mentimeter question on exactly this, and just imagine in your school, in your kindergarten, people would say, we are going to install a camera to analyze how this is happening. Und die Frage können wir vielleicht reinsetzen. Also digitale Gesichtsauswertung, das ist die Frage Nummer 7. Und die Idee dahinter ist natürlich zuerst einmal, den Unterricht zu optimieren und zu sagen, okay, Also dadurch lernen die Kinder besser, weil man weiß aus vielen Studien, hier in Berlin gibt es das Max-Planck-Institut für Bildungsforschung, and they find out that, you know, in mathematical courses, young people are not at all interested. So you could help the teacher, perhaps. So here, this I expected this, which is a strong no. No camera, no face recognition or interpretation in German schools. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, I mean,
You would also vote that way.
I will definitely vote that way. But my question then would be, and we don't have a question on that, but is it because they're children or is it because they are human beings? So would you be opposed to that if it was about, for example, university students? That's an interesting question in itself. I mean, it's a matter of age, and you want to protect, to shield your children from being mapped throughout since they're born, essentially, or is it because we value privacy? Definitely, I value privacy. I'm also a teacher, so yeah. I mean, maybe it would be nice to have some more sense, like the temperature of the room. At the same time, I can also tell you that I see very well with looking at Facebook when I teach, without having any extra facial recognition technology.
We all say facial recognition is not okay. I mean, I have a smartphone and it unlocks, you know. This is a hell in COVID times, you know, because with the mask it doesn't identify me. But we want to keep in mind that looking at schools, the majority, 91% of this very unrepresentative 43 votes say no. I would like to ask you, schaltet nochmal auf meinen Laptop, because I want to tell you another story. Ich möchte Ihnen jetzt einfach eine Geschichte erzählen. Und die Geschichte hat damit zu tun, if it's okay, Stefania, I will do it in German, dass in der Fliegerei sehr oft es natürlich zu ganz schlimmen Unfällen kommt. Und das ist oft, nicht immer, aber oft nicht technisches Versagen, sondern menschliches Versagen, okay? Also Piloten, die Fehler machen und die am Ende dazu führen, dass viele Menschen sterben. Und jetzt, ich bitte Sie dabei, es ist nicht polemisch gefragt, es ist wie ich mal ehrlich gefragt. Jetzt stellen wir uns einfach mal vor, es gibt eine Methodik, bei der man einfach nachgucken kann und auch Piloten trainieren kann, um einfach besser zu fliegen. Warum? Weil ein Pilot zum Beispiel im Landeanflug eine bestimmte Kaskade von Instrumenten genau angucken muss. Und genau das kann man vielleicht mit Hilfe von Gesichtserkennung und Gesichtsverfolgung optimieren. Und das ist natürlich ein ganz wichtiges Moment, weil dadurch die Sicherheit gewährleistet wird. Okay? Und jetzt möchte ich noch einmal die Frage stellen, wären Sie denn damit zumindest einverstanden? Das zumindest ist falsch, so darf man keine Frage stellen. Also wären Sie damit einverstanden, dass man aus Sicherheitsgründen in einem Cockpit eine Kamera installiert, die am Ende dazu führt, dass beim Training und auch beim Flug die Sicherheit besser wird, weil man unter Umständen Schwächen früh identifizieren kann und den Piloten vielleicht nachschulen. Also noch einmal an Ronny die Frage, im Mentimeter, würden Sie digitale Gesichtsauswertung bei Piloten zulassen? Also wie gesagt, bei Schülern sagen wir nein, aber die Frage ist, would we accept it with pilots for the sake of, well, security and safety? I'll give you some minutes, but I would say this time the majority says yes, understandable with all the poor people dying, so it's a very strong, clear signal. What is your interpretation of that, Stefania?
Well, I guess this is very intuitive, I guess. I mean, when security or human lives are at stake, we are willing to bend our values, assuming that values, one of the fundamental values is privacy. In this case, we're actually bending the values, the right to privacy of the pilot, in fact. So I'm not sure how many pilots there are amongst these 43 people who voted. That might slightly change.
Do we have a pilot? Normally you ask, do you have a doctor on board? Do we have a pilot on board? But it's quite interesting. 70% is a huge majority. Is this acceptable? I mean, or is this a door through which you could start, you know, in the name of safety, in the name of security, you can, you know, open up things. I mean, look at cameras, look at the Snowdens, and it's all for the sake of safety.
Well, I mean, in principle, I agree with you. It's like you know, a little hole in the dam, as probably a Dutch will say, a breach in the dam that then, you know, allows the sea to enter, and that's of course dangerous. At the same time, this is a pretty idealistic position because that breach in the dam is already there. There's already many instances in which facial recognition is implemented already today in our cities. And that's what worries me, it rarely or almost never goes through any mechanisms of democratic accountability. You hardly ever have a parliament or local council voting or the citizens being asked in a referendum, what do you think? So it happens, often in the name of safety or efficiency of, you know, enhancing the public services and stuff like that. But what worries me is really that we have no control of that. And very often we're simply not told. We had a case recently in Italy where the city of Como, which is a very nice little, relatively middle-sized, beautiful town by a lake in the western, northwestern part of the country, where, you know, facial recognition had been implemented and no one knew anything unless, you know, before actually. A journalist went to ask questions and then the municipality had to, you know, take more than a few steps back. But yeah, I mean, what worries me is not just the fact that we might pave the way for more intrusions, but the fact that often we're simply not aware, not asked about whether we are okay.
So the big question is transparency.
Sorry, what?
Transparency. Transparency in the sense of we take this data.
Mm.
Now, we have examples where there is some sort of transparency if we look at the world of advertising. And we sort of constantly give data, we get tailor-made, targeted advertising back. And in some areas, we even start with something which is called behavioral policy pricing, so it goes quite far. And we have two questions which we would like to discuss with you here and you, YouTubes, which is just imagine, first of all, imagine you have an insurance company, okay? Health Insurance, eine Krankenversicherung. Und die Krankenversicherung sagt, wenn du mir deine Mobilitätsdaten gibst, dann kann ich ja so ein bisschen monitoren, wie du drauf bist. If you give me your activity data, you get a rebate. Dann kriegst du einen Rabatt. Behavioral Policy Pricing heißt also, nach meinem Verhalten wird dann auch der Preis der Versicherung angesetzt. Ich habe dazu eine Frage, die mich auch einfach mal interessiert. Würden Sie die Aktivitätsdaten, also würden Sie hier im Raum, würdest du im YouTube die Aktivitätsdaten mit deiner Krankenkasse teilen, wenn Sie dafür einen 20%igen Rabatt erhalten? Also sagst du, ist kein Problem, nimm meine Aktivitätsdaten, aber dafür wird es ein bisschen günstiger. Und es ist etwas, was immer mehr verfeinert wird. Also soll ein Typ, der so wie ich raucht, oder ein anderer, der trinkt, ja, müssen ihr Tarif hoch sein, weil ich rauche? Oder ist es vielleicht fairer zu sagen, naja, also mein Verhalten bestimmt am Ende, das ist meine Verantwortung. So we see here, how would you interpret this, Stefania? What is this? This is, a majority says no.
Well, there are many interpretations. One is that perhaps you're rich enough or wealthy enough or well off, so that a 20% discount doesn't really make a difference, right? So you can spare that money. People who have less disposable income, they might actually say, well, I take it. It's a good deal. So that's one interpretation.
Shall we ask? I mean, 29% means there are some people here who voted with yes. Wer hat mit Ja gestimmt? Einfach mal Winke, Winke machen. Da vorne, da hinten. Wollen Sie vielleicht kurz sagen, warum? Also Sie müssen natürlich immer die Maske anziehen und ans Mikrofon gehen. Das tut mir leid, das ist Dialog in Zeiten von Corona. Und das Mikrofon nicht anfassen und unten auf diesen rosa Fleck, sonst kriege ich Krach. Sehr gut, wunderbar. So,
okay.
Vielleicht ganz kurz, wollen Sie Ihren Namen preisgeben? Also ich meine...
Okay, I'm Mark.
Mark?
Ja.
Okay, hallo Mark.
Hallo. Okay, in German, in Deutsch.
Ja?
Okay, also ich würde es preisgeben, weil ich halbwegs sicher bin, dass ich da keine negativen Punkte mache, weil ich mich viel bewege. Und dann würde ich so denken, okay, nehme ich mit.
So, Mark is a very sporty guy. I mean, she's also very sporty. She's, but are you sure, Mark, sind Sie sich sicher, es kann ja auch sein, dass bei den Daten auch noch so irgendwelche unregelmäßigen Dinge rauskommen, die nichts mit Ihren sportlichen Aktivitäten zu tun haben, aber wo man einfach sagt, naja, Mark ist, vielleicht hat der irgendeinen Defekt, ja. Sie können gar nichts dafür, aber die Wahrscheinlichkeit, dass die Krankenversicherung da mehr blechen muss, ist höher. Aha.
Ja, würde ich jetzt erstmal in die Fiktion abgeben, ehrlich gesagt.
Da sagen Sie das Fiktion?
Ja. Also so einen Bonus gibt es tatsächlich ja schon, ne? Wenn man tatsächlich nicht krankgeschrieben war und sowas halt.
Ja.
Geht ja in die Richtung.
Aber Sie bleiben beim Ja und Sie sagen, okay,
erstmal schon, ja.
Nutze die Daten, 20% weniger ist gut.
Ja.
Okay. Es ist total spannend, weil in China wird das zum Teil gemacht und also wissen Sie, ich habe das blödeste Gerät, if I may say this ich war in Shenzhen und da gibt es tatsächlich so Apparate, da hängen Sie das Handy rein und dann wackeln die einfach die ganze Zeit. Das sieht so aus, als würden Sie joggen wie ein Weltmeister. Ja? Ich habe blöderweise so ein Teil nicht mitgenommen. Natürlich Marc nicht, Marc joggt, aber es gibt interessante Blüten dabei.
Ich habe auch so Gerät.
Well, vielen Dank, Marc, und danke für die Offenheit. So, you heard Marc, and Marc says very clearly, okay, it is, I'm doing sports, so why not?
Well, in principle, I really like sports, so why not find a mechanism that rewards people who, instead of sitting on the couch and being the classical couch potato, they try to keep healthy. At the same time, one can also argue, well, you jog, well, your knees are maybe not gonna last very long. Or in my case, for example, I practice boxing. I might end up with some brain issue. So, there's different interpretations also of the sport that we like to do, and over time things might change. Now, you're talking about China. There's South Africa. In South Africa, they go even a bit further with their policy and the ability, the insurance policy, the ability to shape your behavior. You get a discount if you go to a certain gym. So it's not even about jogging along the canal. It's about actually being affiliated to a certain community. And they also track what you put in your trolley at the supermarket. So they can actually see whether, this guy is having a little too much gin tonics in the evening, no? So it can go a long, long way.
But at the end, well, isn't this narrowing down liberty. I mean, just imagine a rainy day in Berlin, and I'm looking out of this wonderful futurium, and there is my friend jogging. And I say, oh, that's great, you're jogging. And he said, no, it's shit. I have to jog because of my policy. I have to bring down my price. So the question is, will data start shaping us, which at the end could result in a reduction of liberty?
Yes, and unfortunately it already does. I mean, the health insurance is, an area of our life which is particularly sensitive for a variety of reasons and good reasons, not last because of the price. But there's many others, much more subtle and much more invisible, yet extremely present way of shaping our behavior. I want to share a little experiment that my team did about Amazon and about, behavioral pricing, dynamic pricing.
Before we do that, let's ask a question.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, what we saw here was behavioral policy pricing concerning an insurance. But now just imagine we could sort of take the same idea and look at pricing. So, und jetzt komme ich nochmal auf Deutsch, und jetzt muss ich nur gucken, welche Frage das ist. Wenn Sie eine Preisgestaltung haben, also die Folie 5, da haben Sie, die könnte ja auch so gestaltet sein, dass man ein bisschen guckt, ach, der Typ, der ist reich, da kostet es mehr. Und bei dem anderen, der arme Schlucker, ja, einen alten Windows-Computer von 1900 so und so, also dem musste das Ding für günstig geben. Er nickt hier. Aber ich hoffe nicht, dass du einen Computer von... Nein, okay. Also das wäre ja auch ein Stück Fairness in einer Gesellschaft. Und jetzt wird votiert und wiederum in dieser absolut hoch statistisch relevanten, also Wurzel n durch n, 35 Tore, ne, das ist total relevant, was wir hier sehen, das Nein, oder? Würde ich interpretieren so. So people say no.
Please, because I lost the channel.
Okay.
Can you read the question again for me?
So the question was, if you look at pricing, should you have personalized pricing, which is linked, for example, to the income of a person. So if I sell you a pullover, she's a rich woman, so it's going to cost more, and the other one is going to pay less.
With pretty dramatic differences, actually. It happens. I mean, it's not science
First
fiction.
of all, people say no. The majority says we don't want it, and you have to help me because I show you a slide, and perhaps we can switch the board, Ronnie. Here is an example.
Yeah.
A flight, 2 people. The one guy pays $300. The other guy, oh, I love this. This is flights. I give you another example. Cars, rental cars. You come to the airport and you say, oh, rental cars. And look at the left side, you have exactly the same data, same date, etc. The one guy pays $40 for a compact car, the other one $22.95. This is almost half. This is not fiction, huh?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely not fiction. If you shop on Amazon, that happens all the time. The problem is that, I mean, these examples you might have already heard about, have come across, and maybe you are yourself, trying to outsmart the algorithm by using different computers or different browsers, or simply by erasing the cookies, your browsing history, which only does that much anyway. But these are good health behaviors anyway. So these you might know, but what we are not aware typically, because the algorithm doesn't, of course, the platform doesn't tell us, has no interest in telling us, is that we are profiled continuously, and on the basis of this sort of profile that I have of us, we are served different products. So the order of what we are offered to buy might be different, because we have different tastes in book or in sport, for example. And that supposedly reflects what we care about, but also the price is different. On the basis of whether, for example, you bought like more expensive items or less expensive, how frequently, but also on the basis of an enormous variety of data that we're not fully aware of, and that's a problem, that are gathered about us when we browse, and in combination between, across platforms.
This example was, in fact, very clearly analyzed, and it was very trivial. These were just two different computers. One was a cheap Windows computer, and the other was an Apple computer. So you just use the browser, and the browser itself, the internet knows what sort of computer you are browsing on. And by knowing that this is a Windows computer, they say, oh, this poor guy, give him a cheap car, and the other one having a more expensive Apple computer gets the higher price. So this was done in this very clear experiment. Now, this is still trivial, but if you go on, this is happening in a way where we are not aware of it. And I think so that's the very important point one has to raise. Huh?
And not only we're not aware of, but the legal instruments that we currently have to control this software that gets information from us are apparently not enough. Why do I say that? Well, I already mentioned the General Data Protection Regulation, which is a very important piece of legislation at the European level, so an umbrella legislation that then is implemented in equal measure in all the member states, so also in Germany, that is supposed to protect us. I mean, it's a data protection set of measures. Now, we have evidence from an experiment that we have done, me with my team, that Amazon, in fact, collects many, many more data than what we believe it does and what even the European Union tells Amazon it can do. And on the basis of these experiments, we did something similar. Like we created, we used different machines, and we also created fake profiles with different features, and we trained them to behave in a certain manner. So we created, ideal type individuals. We noticed the price difference. We also noticed that we tricked the algorithm. For example, the lead developer of the software that we used to do this, Claudio Agosti, who is bald, but was managed to trick the algorithm because it was being sold shampoo for quite some money. So, which is clear. I mean, it was clearly not a client of shampoo, right? So there are ways. I mean, we saw the behavior of the algorithm to some extent, although these are trade secrets, right? So what we were doing was to reverse engineer, if you want, try to infer from what we would be served the algorithms behind the platform. We could detect that, well, what we think is that Amazon collects many more information about us than the GDPR actually allows it to do. And on the basis of that, we delivered a report in Brussels with the European Data Protection Supervisor. I don't know exactly, I mean, they're still sitting on that as far as I can tell. But we were trying also to get, to go all the way to promote some, to do some good old advocacy to have some legislation change. Now, then of course, if you really look at all the interests that are into this business, there are very, very many. And, a representative, a Brussels bureaucrat, said that when the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was under discussion in Brussels, they saw a very, very intense lobbying activity by the representative of these US companies descending on Brussels to try to get away with legislation which is slightly more favorable. So, untransparent, but also legislative instruments which are good in the sense that it is the best we have ever got, but not yet good enough. And citizenry who, at the end of the day, also likes to be served product that fits their desires.
So we saw Amazon calling. We saw that we have this tailor-made data which is being used, which is being sucked out, the profiling, the targeting, and I want to, coming to the end before we open the discussion, I would like to speak about, well, something very elementary in a democracy, which is information. So if you Google, if I Google, slowly, well, also here, the information you get, the news feeds I get are different.
Yeah.
So this is one point, and the second point is the business model of information in social networks, because this is money. The more you are addicted, the more you are looking to the screen, the more I can give you advertising, the more I can pull out even more data, knowing you better so that I can succeed. And this algorithm, in a remarkable analysis of Sinan Oral from the Lone School at MIT, Harvard, discovered that, well, the byproduct of this is false news. He did an analysis with Twitter, finding out that the spread of false news, just because it's more attractive, because we all look at it and say, whoa, this is not true, and so on, spreads 6 times faster than true news within Twitter. And this is depicted so up there, this is the false news spreading compared to the boring true news. I don't believe that Twitter is evil, that Google is evil, that Facebook is evil, but I believe that is this the construction of something like a machine where you suddenly see that this causes things to happen, like, I'll just show you 2 examples. If you Google, and if you Google, it's going to be different from what I'm Googling, but if I Google, the second shot is vaccination, no thanks. So we have a society which is sort of slowly going apart in the times of COVID. Just I want to show it to you because I think so it's important that we have to discuss about that. We have a book at Spiegel bestseller #1 Taschenbuch, which is Sukharit Bhakti, Corona Fehlalarm, where, and I want to be very polite, I don't want to polarize, but where there are many questionable arguments where at least a huge science community says this is not fact-based. So are we running into a crisis of information? And let me just come to an illustration where everybody is targeted. So I know exactly not only what you buy, but also which political preferences you have. I can attribute this to the red or the blue political party, whatever that is, and I can interconnect you. This is happening in a certain way right now, not, I think so, on purpose. No one wants to destroy this democracy, at least I have the feeling. But we see these so-called echo chambers where one closed community say we are right and the other ones, and they don't talk. So this amount of polarization which is happening, which we can see in a very clear way in the US elections right now. Never before has there been such a big divide between Republicans and Democrats, or if you look at protests here. So this is tearing up our society, or?
Potentially. Potentially, I mean, in the sense that there's always been diverging opinions, right? And it's also healthy in a democracy that we do not all think alike. Now, in the past, however, you would have, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, depending on the country, public service broadcasters, public service, right? That supposedly, you know, for good or bad, but they were trying to serve the democracy and the democratic society by providing informations. And one of the basic notions of journalism, I was trained as a journalist a long time ago, is fairness, right, in reporting the news. So you would typically go to, you know, the right-wing politician, but also the left-wing politician. You will try to have a balanced representation of society. We will still, you know, have people voting differently, but that's the essence of democracy, and democracy is ultimately very beautiful also for this reason. Now, what we see now is indeed the sort of explosion of news sources, which in itself might not be bad. I'm in love with alternative media. I'm in love with people producing media and producing their stories, no matter how small they are. The problem is that what we lack are pointers to help us understand what's right, what's wrong. And what's more, to go back to the data, discussing the risks of data and platforms. We live enveloped in this, bombardment of information from very, very many sources that, on top of that, often come to you through a very, very intimate device, like the phone. Not only an intimate device, but also through our intimate contacts. I might believe a piece of news that comes from Ranga because I like Ranga, as opposed to a piece of news that comes from let's say the CNN, because I don't know the journalist behind the story. So there's many, many different mechanisms in which trust is created, which were not there before. Now, to go back again to the data and to the perils that these systems represent for democracy, what is the problem there is that we observe information believing that it's a faithful representation of the world. So if I go on my Facebook feed, what I would see is people that think like me, partially because it is the echo chamber, the filter bubble that you mentioned. I tend to hang out with my friends. And if that was the case with the local bar, with the local cafe, now it's much more diffuse and much more difficult to control.
There are some people who say, the main problem is the big ones, because we have in this sort of area of magical new things happening on one side and dystopia on the other, so it's interlinked, the lovely parts and the dark side. But one problem is we have the very few big ones, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, and so on. If you just remember, there were, harsh political talks in the US even, where now slowly one comes to realize we have to change something. If you look these people here, Tom Cook from Apple, Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, just these four people have more power than entire countries. If you look at the pocket money, Apple, this just a couple of months back, surpassed the 2 Trillion or 2 Billionen Vermögenswert. Also, one of them can buy the entire DAX, all the companies. That's pocket money. So we are aware of the huge power, and this is power which was given to them by the data. Now there are some...
And by us. And by us.
We.
Yeah.
There are some people like, for example, now she is in the European Union. Before she was our former Minister of Justice. And she said, well, we really have to start thinking about Kartellrecht der Daten. So this is not the antitrust laws in the old economic sense, but in the new sense of data, of privacy, of something like that. There are some people speaking about it. Is that a solution? Could that be a solution? Not sort of to derail into a new superpower, which is not anymore a democratic voted superpower?
It might be already too late for that, but it is definitely a good way. It's worth to try to see what happens. If individual countries is a bit difficult, but if, for example, the European Union was a sizable actor, has the power, as far as at least European Union citizens are concerned, to change things in that matter. At the same time, it's a question of whom do we trust? Do we trust the private sector? Do we trust the state? Who is the arbiter of truth? So, there are many different angles at which, through which we can look at this problem. Legislation regulation is one of them. Self-regulation has been tried, has not worked very well. The other key, I think, solution, in my humble opinion, perhaps because I'm an educator, so I spend quite some time trying to teach people these things and discuss this with my students, for example, is ultimately literacy. So we need a strong state who is able to regulate all of this, but we also need to become aware users, critical users.
But how do you do that in a world where, well, when we are ready here and we go to a restaurant, I use Google Maps. I mean, she went to Google Maps today, she arrived in Berlin and she went to, how was the road? Luisenstraße, and she went sort of far beyond Tegel on her bike, because there are 2 Luisenstraßes in Berlin, which was great. She had a lot of bicycling on a sunny Saturday afternoon in Berlin. But we use these tools in everyday life. So how will we be able to, on one side, use them because they're convenient, on the other side, refrain from it means losing convenience? Are we trapped in this sort of world of convenience?
Well, we in a sense we are. We increasingly be. I mean, like with public transport requiring you to use, for example, I mean, in the Netherlands we went paperless. So we use cards. We don't have paper tickets anymore, right? If you want a paper ticket, you pay more. So with a lot of banking going through the mobile, I mean, like we are forced by the system that surrounds us and to get on these platforms, to act there, to spend time there, to give up our data. But I'm not the one who says, hey, leave it all behind and go live in the caves. It's a bit of a, how many people are willing to do that. Certainly not me, frankly. So what should we do? I mean, we should really try. And the fact that you're here tonight here on YouTube, it's a very good sign. I mean, you're already working to become a critical user of these platforms.
That's interesting. We use the platforms in order to be a critical user of the platform, huh? It's a bit of contradiction. It sometimes feels that way.
Yeah, but you have to know your enemy, right?
But you can't use the enemy to, well, okay.
You can.
I want to, at this moment, if it's okay with your permission, to open the floor, and to open the floor not only here, but also the YouTube floor. And we have the voice of YouTube. Oh yeah, okay. YouTube is silent, totally shocked about this discussion. Are there, next time we have
censored.
No, it's not censored. I don't believe in that. But are there still questions here in the audience concerning the data topic? Yes, go ahead, Selina. Yes, put on your mask, go to the mic. And it's going to be a dangerous question because she's my daughter. I don't know what she's going to ask.
So since it's a question for you, I'm just going to ask it in English. We've just seen a picture of the Stasi Central before and a picture of Alexa. And if in 1990 you had asked people, would you put something like Alexa in your home, presumably they would have said no. Now it's here 2020, 30 years later, and a lot of people have it. We talked about sensors in your phone that can sense Parkinsonism. We talked about reading out children's emotions. Today, a lot of people said no about that. What do you think the answer will be in 2050, 30 years from now?
Wow, I wish I had a crystal ball to see that.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually the $1 million question, €1 million, whatever question. And as I said, I wish I had a crystal ball. I have to say I was already wrong once, so I might be wrong again. And I was wrong when I expected after Snowden everyone to take the streets and protest to start with. And it went fairly unnoticed. I mean, actually, Angela Merkel went all the way to the United Nations, but my own head of state didn't bother at all. So, long story short, I really don't know, but I think we got adjusted to a lot of things over time. And I mean, the Stasi example, like whatever, like our expectations, our wishes, our desires, our sense of the magic evolves also with technology. We are very much shaped by these imaginaries.
But if you look at, well, the term privacy, let me give you an example. I mean, if you would go back 100 years. Huh? On a sunny afternoon, you would go out, sort of the route you cycled, towards the wonderful lakes around Berlin, and you would go swimming as a young girl. 100 years back, you would have to wear something very long, cover your body, because showing skin was, too private. Now, the bikini is fine. We've got used to it. So is it conceivable that within the next years, perhaps decades, we will have a total change of what we believe is private because, this sort of transparency is there, and in your youth, everybody was drunk and posting strange pictures, and your boss was doing the same, so nobody cares, this is part of your life. So will that change, or do you think there are true, evident, clear ways where privacy is more than just a shift?
I think it is going to shift. And that's why education should really start. I mean, literacy programs should target young children from primary school onwards. Because, we teach children to drive their bike and stop at the stop sign. We teach children to become voters.
But the difference is we are very competent as parents because we know how to drive a bike. But if you take reality, normally it's the opposite. If you go into technology, and poor parents have to ask their children, well, how do you do this? How do you do that? So we have an inversion of competences. How do you deal with that?
Well, the public education system should be able to inform teachers who are able to bridge this gap, right? At the same time, I have great hopes into the younger generations, but of course we're all users of technology, so we all should inform ourselves. To go back to your question, someone has argued that privacy is dead, that it makes no sense whatsoever to talk about privacy, because the more information you inject into the public sphere, the more confusion there's going to be and no one is going to notice, right? I do believe that's deeply wrong. I really value my privacy, but we should really, learn to value privacy ourselves. But my sense of privacy might be different from yours. What is important is that my choice to what to show, what not to show is a conscious one, right? I decide I'll go this far. For me, that's too much, or whatever. So this is the word that I would like to see. Now, going back to a very important document in our recent history, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, privacy is one of the rights written in this very important document. So it's not that it might evolve, but it's not bound to disappear. That's what I hope, at least. But we have to nurture it so that it doesn't disappear. We have to take care of it as a collectivity, as individuals.
Thank you so much, Stefania Milan. Is there another question? Because otherwise I would like to close the floor this evening. And if you are worried about privacy, there is a very simple solution. Go out on the countryside. There is no internet in Germany. It's miserable connections. Nobody is able to get your data because the lines are not there. And this is going to be the topic in lively discussion here at the Futurium on October 22nd. Order, geht Digitalisierung am Dorf vorbei? Eine Unterhausdebatte. Ich hoffe, Sie kennen dieses Prinzip. Wenn nicht, wenn Sie im Fernsehen sehen, wie im Unterhaus hin und her geschrien und argumentiert wird und zwischendurch haut der Spokesman oder der Moderator drauf und sagt Order oder Language und so weiter. Also eine freudige Veranstaltung, und da ich auf dem Dorf lebe, hoffe ich, dass da sehr viel Konstruktives rausgeht. Und wenn Sie sagen, da kann ich nicht, dann sollten Sie am 23. Oktober kommen, denn dann gibt es einen ganzen Tag hier im Futurium, was ganz toll ist, nämlich diese großartige Mosaik-Expedition, die größte Arktis-Expedition überhaupt. Dieses wunderbare Schiff Polarstern war eingefroren im arktischen Eis, hat also auch diesen furchtbar langen Winter, wo es dauerdunkel war, verbracht und dabei viele neue Erkenntnisse gemacht und die Crew, die Leute, Antje Boetius als großartige Wissenschaftlerin, die sich auch super ausdrücken kann, ist hier. Also, wenn es Ihnen zu warm wird, kommen Sie am 23. Oktober 2020 ins Futurium. Hier wird es richtig cool. Und wenn Sie sagen, na ja, geht vielleicht, dann empfehle ich Ihnen eine Diskussion, die ich eigentlich schon ein bisschen früher, ich wollte sie eigentlich im Mai machen, und zwar exakt ein Jahr nachdem er dieses Video gepostet hat, die Zerstörung der CDU, glaube ich, hieß es, Rezo, weil das insofern spannend ist, das muss ich Ihnen kurz erläutern, weil ich am Tag, nachdem er es gepostet hat, oder am selben Tag, habe ich ihn angerufen und ein bisschen später war er bei mir zu Hause auf der Terrasse. Also die Bild-Zeitung suchte noch immer nach ihm und er aß ein Stück Kuchen. Einer von euch war da, ich weiß nicht mehr, ne? Du warst da. Der hat wirklich blöde blaue Haare, aber das ist kein Blöder, also der hat Informatik studiert und was ich dabei total spannend fand, war zu verstehen, wie wirklich diese Welt der Influencer ist, also ja, was müssen die machen, was müssen die nicht machen, was ist vielleicht die Macht von Algorithmen und so weiter. Also ich freue mich da sehr auf den Einblick mit einer Person, die im letzten Jahr jedenfalls sehr für Schlagzeilen gesorgt hat. Und vielleicht können wir nach einer Abkühlzeit noch einmal genau reflektieren, was da los war. So, es gibt natürlich noch viel mehr im Futurium, aber von meiner Seite aus wäre es das. Und ich will noch einmal ein ja, Dankeschön sagen, ein Dankeschön and a thank you for Stefania, who, and we are all very happy, enjoyed, I think, the first live on-stage session in times of COVID. I would like to wish you all the best, stay safe, and remember we are living in strange times. Put on your mask when you leave, and this is not a simple ritual. There are interesting, also you allow, I say it in German, es gibt interessante Erkenntnisse über die Wirksamkeit von Masken. Also da gibt es neuere wissenschaftliche Paper, die zum Beispiel untersucht haben, Covid-Ausbrüche auf einem argentinischen Schiff, wo man einfach feststellt, Leute, die Masken tragen, reduzieren offenbar nach dem, was man da lernt, nicht nur die Infektionsgefahr, aber auch die Härte, die Intensität der Infektion. Man versteht das noch nicht wissenschaftlich, aber es ist super spannend. Und insofern, ja, tragen Sie die Masken. Ich weiß, das ist total blöd, man hat sie gerne weg, aber jetzt, wenn es kalt wird, ist das sicherlich eine, ja, ziemlich uncoole, aber trotzdem gute Sache. Ich wünsche Ihnen alles Gute. Nochmal danke fürs Kommen. Ich weiß das sehr zu schätzen und ich hoffe, wir haben Sie mit ein bisschen Neugier infiziert und die können Sie gerne ohne Maske dann auch weitergeben. Einen schönen Abend. Danke.